Hi, everybody. Welcome to another round of the Nostalgia Trap podcast. My name is David Parsons, and as always, I am very happy that you've tuned in to the show. For those new listeners that are finding the show from Jacobin, thanks so much. Welcome to the program. I hope you enjoy these conversations. I've got many more exciting guests coming this fall, so look out for those, and again, thanks for listening. This week, my guest is someone who I've known almost exclusively, or actually exclusively, from his posts on Facebook. His name is Anthony Galluzzo, and he's someone who's been around CUNY, I know, as an adjunct for a little while. And someone who I ended up friending on Facebook for one reason or another, probably seeing a conversation on another friend's page. But in either case, I can rely on Anthony Galluzzo's Facebook stream for a good kick in the face. He's got a kind of cynical broadcast that provides a really dark vision of American politics in general, and the education system, war, race, politics, all that kind of stuff that this show is concerned with. So I thought I'd talk to him, and we ended up talking a lot about his experience at two different institutions, one at West Point, the infamous military academy, or famous military academy, depending on how you look upon it, and his experience at CUNY, which is the City University of New York, the place where I have been and where I got my PhD, and the place where I've been teaching as an adjunct for well over 10 years. And his experiences, his experience at CUNY especially was quite a negative one, and one that is not a foreign one to me, and not in terms of personally experiencing the exact things that he went through, but hearing about them and being close to them, certainly, and feeling the overall pinch in morale that filters through an institution that is underfunded and ignored in a lot of different ways from by the government that provides its resources. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. So we talk a little bit about that, and how for Anthony Galluzzo, that experience was a one that he experienced through the faculty. But this is something that affects everybody, and I would say the students are the biggest victims of that kind of bureaucratic nonsense. So we chat a lot about that kind of stuff, and I hope you enjoy this conversation with Professor Anthony Galluzzo. I should say he's an English professor. He got his PhD from UCLA, and is now up at a college in Maine called Colby College, as a visiting assistant professor. So he knows his stuff, but he's also got a particular viewpoint on what academia has become. So we have a kind of shop talk about academia. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you enjoy more of these conversations. You can find them on iTunes. You can find the blog at nostalgiatrap.libsyn.com. Like the Facebook page, Nostalgia Trap Facebook page, and get updates on new episodes and things like that. And of course, Stitcher Radio Network, Stitcher.com, has an app that you can download stuff onto too. So go get more episodes. Thanks for listening. This is me and Anthony Galluzzo.
So yeah, I am a native New Yorker, I guess, although the city has become kind of unrecognizable. I spent about 6 years away from New York when I did my PhD in Los Angeles.
You went to UCLA?
Yeah.
What was that like? So what period was that when you were in LA?
I arrived, I guess I started the PhD program in, was it 2000? Yeah, okay. 2001. So yeah. I spent most of, and I came back here in 2006. I had managed to get one of several dissertation fellowships. So I ended up writing most of the dissertation back here in New York. But I was there for the first.
So it sounds like you were in LA when 9/11 happened. Like you had just moved to LA when that happened, something like that.
I think I've been there for a year. I don't know. It's a crazy story.
I always love 9/11 stories. I was in LA when 9/11 happened. I was actually working in a tower in LA, and everyone evacuated because they thought that the planes were coming all the way across the nation. But what happened to you?
Well,
what was your 9/11 experience?
It was very much tied up to. I mean, in retrospect, it seems silly, but a kind of this sort of tempestuous relationship I had. This woman that I had been dating while I was still on the East Coast had moved out to Los Angeles, and we were living together. And then I came back to New York. This is the very end of the summer, so I believe this was like last week of August. And she was supposed to meet me, but she decided to sort of take off instead. And I found out later on that this is kind of, I guess this is kind of what she does, etc. So, but I was just, I didn't know what had happened. In other words, so I thought maybe something had happened to her, etc. So I was actually originally, my ticket to return was on September 11th.
Wow.
I mean, it wasn't on one of the planes, but I was supposed to fly that day, but I ended up instead flying out a couple of days earlier. And so, I was confused. I was distraught. And then September 11th happened.
I love that it's the date that September 11th happened. You know what I mean? Like it's actually like become the event has become the date.
But it was this. It was like one of these sort of apocalyptic. We were talking about how the summer's been some apocalyptic, sort of an apocalyptic autumn because I had this sort of personal upset, but it was fine though. You
had emotional terrorism going on in your life.
But it was fine because everybody was on the same page.
Right. So it's like, the world matches my feelings.
Yeah. So nobody noticed that I was sort of weeping in public.
We all are. We're all in despair.
But sort of one of the an interesting sort of story. Immediately after that, there was this. I lived in Santa Monica at the time, and there was this bar called Father's Office that I would go to. Do you know that?
I don't think so, but I mean, it sounds familiar. But LA is such a melange in my head. I have no idea.
So I was going there. One night I went there. I was drinking, and who was there? But do you remember Jason Patric?
Yeah, of course.
So Jason Patric was in there, and
he's in some great movies.
Yeah, although I don't know what he's. I
don't know what movies he's been in. He was in Speed 2. It took over for Keanu.
The Lost
Cruise
Boys,
Control,
right?
Yeah, and there's a Neil LaBute movie that he's in called Don't Get Me. I forget
what was the movie he was in with Jennifer Jason Leigh where he plays an undercover cop and he gets addicted to heroin? You know what I'm talking about?
Sounds familiar.
Anyway,
that's not Speed 2. No,
I don't think so. It could be though.
It could be.
But anyway, he was in there. We got drunk together, and then he sold me an FDNY T-shirt.
So he just had one with him?
No, he was selling them because what's that guy? Dennis Leary.
Yeah.
Dennis Leary apparently lost one of his brothers.
He's all about the fire. Yeah. He's been milking the 9/11 firefighter thing for 13 years.
So he was just trying. He was trying to raise money for the Dennis Leary fund. I don't know, but I was very sort of sentimental. It was like this New York expatriate scene.
Yeah, totally.
So I ended up buying this FDNY
crazy
T-shirt from Jason Patric.
Like a few days after 9/11.
Yeah, it was a few days after 9/11.
So how do you get from LA to back to the East Coast?
All right.
Was it employment that brought you back?
Well, I mean, and initially I came back because I managed to get a couple of dissertation fellowships.
Cool.
So I didn't have to teach. I've been out there for 5 or 6 years. I mean, my relationship to LA, I initially despised Los Angeles.
Yeah.
As a native New Yorker, I thought it was just a sort of cancerous suburban sprawl. But I actually learned to like it after a while.
What about it did you like? Because I have this on the previous show that I hosted, Topical Fever. We did a lot of like LA versus New York talk, and I still haven't settled on it because I'm from Ventura, California, which is like a little bit north of LA, and LA is still this. I feel that cancerous suburban sprawl thing, but it also I feel this like kind of David Lynch mystery stuff about it, and I'm very torn about the place.
Well, there's that. I mean, I was had this sort of I've always had fascination with sort of noir.
Yeah,
and there's that sort of noirish sort of aspect. There's something rotting in the sun.
Chinatown
near the pool outside
stuff.
Chinatown. Yeah. Also, there are other sort of little fixations. My obsession with sort of the Frankfurt School in Exile.
Yeah.
There's that. But I mean, beyond these are sort of to a certain extent these are sort of academic fixations, right? But there's just certain aspects of LA, like some of these sort of these sort of interesting sort of working class immigrant communities, like, driving out to places like Monterey Park,
Yeah.
or, like sort of the little Cambodia out in Long Beach. I mean, you find these sort of little worlds.
You have to
these
know where to go,
Yeah. It's an insider city in that sense.
Like
but,
New York is a place that you can just kind of walk around and find stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, I don't know, the light. I don't know. I sort of the things I miss about it. I live near the water, so just
the sun,
beach,
the light of the
canyons,
sun is
the
different.
sun, yeah.
Yeah. I always say that I like the winter sun of LA for some reason. It has kind of like this piercing blankness to it that's very attractive
But
to
the
me.
problem is that it's when you live in an environment in which it's seemingly June year after year after year, you really time becomes problematic.
It fucks with you.
Yeah, I think that's why these people have issues aging there.
Yeah.
I mean, probably something to do with Hollywood as well. But, I mean, years would go by and you wouldn't really have a sense of years going by because you don't have that cyclical, seasonal.
Yeah, no, I think that's a big consideration for me. Like the feeling of just kind of the monotony of the seasons. Not that there aren't seasons in LA. There is a kind of like subtlety. You have to like recognize. Oh, it's kind of turning to fall here because the light is different. I feel like the light is the main difference in the seasons.
You get those winds. It gets very hot in the fall. I remember.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then and then you get more rain in the winter.
It's just driving around just kills me. The traffic now. I mean, I don't know how long it's been since you've been there, but it seems like it's getting worse every time I go back. I go back a lot because my parents live very close to there, and it's just like it just seems to be more people all the time, and it does feel apocalyptic. I was living in the valley when 9/11 happened as a plane goes by. And when living in the valley, like post college, really not doing much with my life besides maybe the occasional mushroom trip and working various temp jobs, and realizing that my education at UCSB was not a ticket to any kind of job or happiness. Like no one cared that I had a degree when I applied for jobs. It was just kind of shocking to me, like kind of being pulled out of like my entitlement and realizing that I was going to have to like drag it out with everybody else. And that cynicism was kind of overtaking me when 9/11 happened, and the valley, and it's kind of like just you talk about like the sprawl of just rot in the valley. It's an amazing slice of like degraded humanity, and it just felt it just felt right, to be there, because it's nothing but like strip clubs and payday loans and shit. It's really depressing.
Where in the valley?
I was in Reseda.
Oh, okay.
Reseda, Tarzana, this area.
Yeah, I tended to avoid the valley.
Yeah.
As well as Orange County, so maybe that. I mean, I don't know. I guess from my perspective though, LA, and it probably it's more to do with where I am now. But when I think back upon that time in my life, it seems idyllic.
Would you ever go back to LA?
Yeah, yeah.
If you had a job offer.
If I had a job offer, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, California seems idyllic. I mean, like I said, I haven't been back in a few years, so a lot of this is just sort of a function of nostalgia.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you're speaking of job offers and negotiating all of that. How are you negotiating all of that? Because it seems like what I just mentioned about like coming out of undergrad, and that's like one shock, but then like coming out of graduate school and like having a PhD and kind of negotiating this job market that's awful for everybody.
It's been a nightmare.
Particularly in the humanities.
It's been a nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you find new levels of cynicism.
Well,
like how do you battle against that?
I could tell you. I mean, it's sort of interesting because, like I said, I came back here in 2006. I was here for a couple of years writing my dissertation. I finished my dissertation. I filed in the fall of 2008, but I had managed at that point to get a 1-year postdoc at the Clark Memorial Library in LA, which is sort of 18th century special collections, etc. So I went back to LA for that year. That was also the first year that I went on the job market. Now that was the year of the financial crash.
Yeah, that's right.
So I had I mean, the academic job market, particularly in the humanities, has been bad for a long time.
Yeah, it was already happening.
But after 2008, it was this sort of, I mean, it just imploded.
It's almost like the financial crisis allows elites to like continue the like process or accelerate it of saying like, well, everyone's got to tighten their belts kind of thing.
Yeah, it's sort of this disaster capitalism.
Yeah,
phenomenon.
definitely.
But I mean, again, I was out there. I was doing this postdoc, and I was living at a boarding house in Hancock Park. It's very sort of
A boarding
noirish.
house, yeah. What is it? I don't even know what a boarding house is.
It was this
It sounds very like Dickensian.
This woman who had gone out to Los Angeles in the 60s.
Right.
She ended up, she was like a kind of this groupie who ended up having some involvement with various members of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young.
Awesome.
She ended up marrying, I believe, a manager or producer. She bought this huge house in Hancock Park. You know, the marriage broke up. She was left with the house, but she was also left with the mortgage. So the way that she afforded it was she just rent out various rooms. So there were a lot of strange people there. It was kind of a Nathaniel West.
How'd you find out about this place?
She would always list on various academics. She wanted academics.
Okay.
Although I mean there were also like a number of actors, would-be directors,
Sure,
etc.
sure.
So I was living in this boarding house.
It is L.A.
This is L.A. I was living in this boarding house, and I applied to several jobs.
Right.
And then this is another apocalyptic moment, right?
Right.
The fall of 2008. The economy is imploding.
Yeah.
And at some point, I'm waiting for either the call, or you got an interview at MLA, or rejection notice. Like, I got several notices like, we've canceled the search.
Yeah.
We've canceled the search. And I was in Chicago. No, I'm trying to think if it was in Chicago or San Francisco that year. I had a few interviews, but one or two of the interviews the job ultimately didn't materialize because the budget.
Right.
Because of these and again, it was these sort of
which sucks.
Elites.
I mean, it's just like they're interviewing for jobs that might not even exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I didn't know what I was out in LA that fall. I didn't have a job. This postdoctoral thing was coming to an end. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I ended up applying for one of these jobs during the second round. It was at West Point, at the military academy.
Yeah, yeah.
and then they called me and they gave me an interview, and I was I was like, I can't do this.
I mean, it's like this is like the question that people ask themselves, like, especially because I know, like, you're probably generally like on the left kind of graduate student, lefty type graduate student, if I can characterize you that way, and it's kind of like. There's the religious schools and the military schools. Like, am I going to apply to these? Like, what made you apply to a military school in the first place? The job?
At that point, I was just applying to whatever. And
yeah.
This is something that, my advisor, people were just, apply as widely as possible without even thinking about it.
Right.
The strange thing was one of the schools that I interviewed with at MLA was the Citadel.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was terrible. I mean, it was. I mean, first of all, counterintuitively, it was the most unprofessional, right? They were late for the interview. They forgot that they were interviewing me. They had, they arrived. One of the interviews arrived with a bottle of champagne. They were ready to get drunk because it was the last day, or the last day of MLA, the last day of interviews.
The fact that they interview people in hotel rooms is really fucked up. Like that whole MLA, the MLA slave market thing is insane because, and it's not just MLA. Like all the AHA conferences are this way too. Where I've talked to like a woman who was like invited into a hotel room to interview and sit on the bed. Like,
that's a standard
like literally
thing.
Like sit on the bed like a child. It's like so inappropriate in like 10,000 ways. It's fucking crazy. I don't get that. I don't get that process at all. It's so humiliating.
I mean, this interview was hilarious because it was the only interview where I was asked that sort of standard question you prepare for: describe your project. I gave them a synopsis of my project, and they were like, "Well, you realize that you'll have to." The immediate response that was like, "You realize you'll have to wear a uniform if
what
you take
kind
a
of
position
uniform?
here."
Do they have like a separate faculty uniform?
I guess you're a captain of some kind. The Citadel is a sort of a frightening place because it's actually not even affiliated with one of the branches of the military. It's affiliated, I believe, with the state militia.
Wow.
So it's actually more conservative than places like West Point or the Air Force Academy. So that was sort of a disaster. I was like, oh my God. And then then I got this interview at West Point.
Yeah.
And they flew me out, and it was a very, very different experience. In fact, I let them know that I had a bad experience with the Citadel, and they took pains to underline the fact that
we're not the Citadel.
We're not the Citadel. We're here. We want different perspectives. This is sort of a serious academic institution.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, I gave a job talk. I work on 1790s radical literary culture.
Right.
So Godwin, Wollstonecraft.
Where does that fit in at West Point?
That's what I was initially confused by that. And
Yeah.
then there was a sort of an interview component
Yeah.
of the flyout where I sat down with, I mean, the name that sort of comes up, I mean, the article that I wrote about this, Elizabeth Salmon, who is the most prominent civilian academic, in not only in they don't actually have an English department. It's called APL, so it's art, history, philosophy, and literature. So essentially, all of the humanities are sort of folded into this one department. But she's one of the most prominent.
Those are the three we want.
Yeah, most prominent civilian academics there.
Okay,
and she really puts a kind of a liberal face. On the military academy, and she really sort of went out of her way to talk about how they're interested in incorporating radical perspectives or critical perspectives into the cadets' education. I told them that I had a fairly negative view of the military, and they reassured me that's fine. That's actually what they want. And
they want like point counterpoint.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Although then my actual experience at West Point was very different.
How long were you there?
3 years.
3 years.
Yeah.
And why did you leave?
Well, they don't actually hire. They don't have tenure at West Point.
Okay. They don't.
I mean, there are people who have de facto tenure.
Were you an adjunct? What was your title there?
No, I was a visiting professor. So they hire on these contract bases.
Right.
So 1, 2, 3 year position. So I had a 3-year position.
Yeah.
The 3-year position came to an end. I mean, you can reapply for another one. I decided that probably wasn't the best
smart
thing to do.
Were you not getting along with people there? Or
yeah, I mean,
what was your experience like?
Yeah, toward the end, I had a fairly antagonistic. Well, I don't know if antagonistic is the right word. Yeah, I mean, I mean, one of the things that they do is that they embed all of their academics, their civilian academics, included into these sort of unit-like structures with a superior officer, pretty much the course director. And they sort of dictate to you. I mean, not only what courses that you will teach, but how you will teach them, etc. So there really isn't a lot of autonomy. And by the last year that I was there, I was compelled to teach their advanced writing class. And their advanced writing class isn't really a writing class. It's actually what they call it's a kind of it's a class dedicated to a cultural destination, right? And some of these cultural destinations have included places like Iran, Turkey.
Did you feel like you were doing the work of the State Department?
Well, I felt like perhaps I was doing the work of the Defense Department because when I was there, I had to teach this course on Cuba.
Right.
And I absolutely didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
I was like, look, I'm not. I told them, I was like, look, if you compel me to teach a class on Cuba, I'm not going to sort of fall in line and offer sort of this standard sort of Miami anti-Castro Cuban line.
Right.
I'm going to teach a fairly sympathetic, of course, it's sympathetic to the regime, and I have all kinds of problems with the regime. But I feel like, that is not the environment in which I should share those.
Right, right.
And it was just
Is that what you were told? I mean, what were you told about the Cuba course? Did you end up teaching it? Or
I did end up teaching it, and it was the thing about it was that. These classes are structured in such a way that there's never a point in which they'll tell you can't teach this or that, right? But there are so many sort of, mandatory, assignments, mandatory films. I mean, it's structured in such a way that you don't have a lot of autonomy. But what I did do was I taught Marx, for instance. So the first part of the class was dedicated to the Communist Manifesto, which was interesting. It was sort of a surreal experience because, all of the cadets for the most part are, they're rabidly anti-communist in a way that's probably uncommon amongst people in their age group.
because anti-communism is so like old school.
But these, a good portion of the cadets at places like West Point are actually from military families.
Okay, yeah, so they have that tradition.
They're often very, very conservative, so they have that. I mean, this is probably something that they just sort of imbibed.
What about like it seems like the equivalent of anti-communism, or maybe not the equivalent, but like some sort of analog is like contemporary analog is like Islamophobia or something like that. Did you experience any of that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first year that I was there,
just straight Arab hate.
Yeah, you
We
get
can
some
put
of
it that
that.
way, yeah.
You get some of that. I mean, the first year I was there, I actually I taught the sort of the intro, the composition course, and one of the things I did was I structured an entire unit around the Army Field Manual and the controversy related to David Petraeus. I mean, it was specifically related to plagiarism, right?
Yeah,
because
right.
if you remember that, there was an entire chapter, the third chapter, that was plagiarized almost entirely from various sort of anthropological sources. A lot of them sort of date like Levi Strauss from the
Jesus.
1950s. But
Wow.
at West Point, plagiarism is this severe, violation of the honor code, etc.
That's kind of weird.
But Petraeus and his or the gang around Petraeus, what was his name? Nagel.
Yeah.
His name. I mean, their response when they were sort of called out on this was like, well, we don't really have to worry about this. This is written for sort of an 8th grade reading level. Like plagiarism isn't an issue. And so this is sort of like my way in with the cadets. Like,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's sort of like, wait, it's not an issue, and yet. I mean, it's an issue. It's an issue with them. I mean,
Yeah,
literally.
right.
I mean, it's drilled into their head. It's a serious, serious thing. And suddenly they're looking at their hero. I mean, these guys are all West Point. I mean, David Petraeus.
Yeah, yeah.
He's like, oh, it's not a big deal when he's putting
Wow.
together the Army Field Manual. So I sort of use that as a way to talk about issues like, I mean, the militarization of knowledge.
Yeah,
The
right,
militarization
right.
of anthropology specifically. And I mean, a lot of them are very intelligent.
They get it. Yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah.
I had a few students who came to me privately oftentimes because it's difficult to sort of articulate liberal, even like sort of liberal sentiments in the open, because you're going to be ostracized. I mean, there's the entire other side of this.
It's such a weird like paradox what's happened to the military in the post-Vietnam era, because it's like the Vietnam War taught the American military and elites in the State Department that and the Defense Department that the blunt instrument of the military is sometimes like not as efficient as it should be, and that it actually can't be used for political ends. So they had to find a way to kind of mix the blunt instrument with the intelligence, with a kind of like a more kind of strategic kind of output, and use humanities departments at colleges across as kind of like their think tank in doing that. So now we have like Obama's smart wars kind of thing, and it's kind of this horrifying moment to be like, what do we want? We want like the blunt instrument of the military, or do we want it to be smart?
Well, there was this whole sort of, I mean, at the
I don't know what's scarier is what I'm saying.
coin is faded to a certain extent, like with but I mean, at the time that I was there, I mean, this is 2009, 2010, 20, I mean, it was the thing, and it had completely pervaded. I mean, we sat above the same building as the Center for Counterterrorism Studies,
right,
and then at the time that was all about coin, and it completely pervaded like the English department. I mean, also the philosophers were all analytic philosophers who were engaged in just war theory.
Right.
So these sort of rationalizations of these engagements. And there was this strange kind of fusion between the sort of the coin discourse and this older sort of 18th century discourse of sympathy. Literature is useful insofar as it enables you to occupy the position of the other. I mean, when you occupy the position of the other, you can more effectively control and neutralize
it's becoming a more
them.
like efficient imperialist, essentially,
Exactly,
right? It's like, well, we can find a way to do this. It's really weird. I mean, it's like it's a move away from an older kind of strategy. It's a move towards a smarter warfare and a smarter imperialism that's really kind of scary, because it's like, At this point, there's like what you're saying, the militarization of knowledge. It's the militarization of everything. Like, it's kind of like taking that these humanities departments, which you kind of like, we convince ourselves are like the last vestige of like pure knowledge, or like learning for learning's sake. The "Oh Captain, My Captain" of Robin Williams. That dream is kind of like. It's kind of wiped away when you have the military kind of sucking.
Well,
off it
I mean,
in this
not
way.
only that. I mean, they're sort of appropriating, these certain aspects of humanistic knowledge that humanists sort of pat themselves on the back for. I mean, when we think about notions of occupying the position of the other, we try to imagine that as a counter to something like militarism, but it's being militarized. So. I mean, it was that was what was useful to me about being there. I mean, it really made me sort of, think
What, did you
about
like see liberalism in a different way?
Yeah, because that was the. I mean, yeah, there were a lot of your sort of typical, reactionary. I mean, both some of the officers who were teaching there as well, the students, of course. But that wasn't sort of the official line at West Point. It was a kind of New York Times liberalism.
Yeah,
and they actually. I mean, there was a way
which is amazing because it's like it kind of like muddies the whole like thing about like liberals like hate like associating like George W. Bush with like militarism. You know what I mean? And like militarism is this like jingoistic, ignorant, patriotic kind of hyper patriotic kind of like redneck thing. Which made liberals very comfortable during the 8 years that Bush was in office.
Yeah.
It was like, well, I know what militarism is because it's this kind of like cowboy with 6 shooters in his hands, and it's just like that cultural stereotype allowed the Obama administration to come in and kind of like kind of take a little bit of that, but also like make war a more sophisticated thing.
Well, Obama was in many ways, a lot of people was sort of beloved amongst a lot of people that I knew at West Point. I mean, the interesting thing about figures like Elizabeth Samet was that I mean, she oftentimes, if you read her memoir, etc., she positioned herself against the more reactionary aspects in the military. Like, for instance, I mean, she argues for a secular military against the sort of the sort of this evangelical contingent that wants God's army, etc. And I mean, there's always and she was cautiously against some of these, or at least she posed these sort of critical questions. Again, she was for the soldiers, for her former students, but she questioned the wisdom of these military adventures such as Iraq. So in a certain way, she made the military safe for New York Times liberals. I mean, she'll occasionally write an editorial.
It sounds like it's like draining the morality question completely out of it, right? Because it's basically like we should not go to war in Iraq, not because it's like killing people is wrong and taking what they have is wrong. It's more posed as, well, it's not smart.
It's not smart.
It's not borne out by the data. You know what I mean? Like it becomes that's the only argument. In other words, they've taken out that kind of like romantic humanistic
or
notion.
insofar as it is about people or the human toll, it's about the soldiers.
Right.
I mean, and there's the other is, I mean, on the one hand, I mean, there's this whole sort of discourse of learning to occupy the position of the other. But on the other hand, when a lot of the discussions that I would involve myself in, I mean, that were critical of these adventures, I mean, that it would focus almost entirely on the cost, the human toll amongst the soldiers. So I don't know. It was a strange place.
So when did you leave West Point?
When did I leave?
Yeah, when did you leave? Or are you still there? You're not.
No. I left 2 years. It came. The 3-year position came to an end 2 years ago.
And you've been around CUNY ever since?
Yeah, I've been
ever since. You've been kicking around CUNY. You joined us in a life that I've been living for the last 10 years.
Well,
which is adjuncting at the City University of New York's various campuses, which can be a mixed bag.
I used to say, I used to think to myself, when I was at West Point, I was like, this is sort of terrible. Like, I mean, oftentimes like having to teach like these remedial classes, in this, I felt like I didn't really have a lot of autonomy. But to a certain extent, I mean, the military in that way is at the forefront of what's happening to higher education in general, right? This sort of, this vocationalization of higher education, which instructors, PhDs, are reduced to content providers. I mean, the only difference, what I found teaching at CUNY as an adjunct, the only difference is that at least the military academy actually pays fairly well. Right.
Well, CUNY is kind of known for being a very low-paying institution when it comes to its adjuncts. But yeah, it's also I think probably the most complicated bureaucracy I've ever experienced in my life.
I mean, we've talked about this before. I've had I don't know if you want me to talk about it now. I've had a nightmarish experience at CUNY.
Right. Yeah. Now, your nightmarish experience has been with the administration, basically. Like your experience, like your nightmare wasn't with the students. Your nightmare was like how was teaching at CUNY as opposed to West Point. You know what I mean? A very different set of students. Like CUNY's, you were at Queens College and Brooklyn College.
Well, it's the first year I taught at Brooklyn College.
Yeah.
I actually taught, and that was probably my best experience. I actually taught an upper division political theory course in the political science department, which is strange. But this is through the graces of Corey Robin. It was kind of early American literature and political theory. So I was teaching figures like Paine, Franklin, alongside Charles Brockton Brown. There's a lot of the stuff that I work on.
And that was class. Did you mix in that? Because I think you mentioned this on Facebook. I saw you recently talk about like American Psycho and Benjamin Franklin's like autobiography.
No, this was a recent class that I taught. That was more of a straight literature course.
Because those go together so perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, my experience at Brooklyn College was probably the best. I was also teaching at York College at the same time, and that was very difficult.
Yeah.
We're talking about, I mean, it's a 4-year institution, but we're talking about, a lot of the classes are sort of at remedial level.
Right.
And it's just also a highly exploitative environment, to the point where,
for everyone,
in that department, the adjuncts were compelled in a way, in a matter of speaking, they were compelled to sort of attend meetings. I mean, I was teaching.
Like you had to go to department meetings?
Well, they weren't. There were these various meetings related to pathways, and I couldn't actually. I mean, that year I was commuting from. I would have this. I had this sort of nightmarish commute where I would commute from Williamsburg to Brooklyn College in Flatbush, and then I would have to go out to Jamaica, Queens.
Yeah. And Queens College is not easy to get to.
Well, this isn't Queens College. This is York.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and I couldn't make a lot of these meetings, and I just remember the chair of the department took me aside, and she's like, if you want to stitch together life as an adjunct, you're going to have to do a lot of things that you don't get compensated for. Because I did raise the issue. I was like, we're not actually technically supposed to be doing this.
Yeah, right.
And I think
you're already getting paid sub minimum wage.
Yeah. So I think that I don't think she appreciated my input.
For those that don't teach at CUNY, and for those that don't know what Pathways is kind of a program that was instituted by the administration. I guess officially maybe a year ago, after a lot of fights with faculty, and it basically rearranged the curriculum standards and gave a lot more power to people that aren't teachers in creating curriculum. But also, people should know that CUNY adjuncts get paid like very, very low. Like I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think like for teaching one class, which meets like twice a week, or sometimes three times a week, you're going to see a paycheck after taxes of maybe like $300 every 2 weeks.
Something like that, yeah.
$300 every 2 weeks. I mean, you could make a lot more money doing a lot of other things. It's really like a very, very low wage.
And that's if you
there's really no ability to survive.
That's if you get paid at all, right?
Yeah, that's right. Well, that was your trouble, right? You were one of the people, and I know this has happened to me too, that didn't get paid for a very long time. Like CUNY also is known for, and I know I'm like kind of like talking about the administration of the school I'm employed by here, but CUNY's kind of known for not paying its adjuncts for a long time as well. And that happened to you? Like, when was that? Like a couple falls ago?
Well, no. Well, last year I managed. Last year I took up I was offered a few classes at Queens College in the Queens College English department, because I actually know a few full-time faculty members in the Queens College English department who were great, but this was sort of a last-minute thing. I was actually sort of hired on, I believe, it was like a few days before the semester
started. Which happens a lot to adjuncts, and has happened to me this semester, literally, where I get an email like yesterday that's like, can you teach a course?
Yeah. So I was teaching 3 classes, and I didn't get paid. I mean, I think the semester begins August 28th, and I didn't get paid until the end of October. And it was just
so that's 2 months. So the 8-week delay in getting your first paycheck.
Yeah, and they told me. I mean, initially they told me it probably wouldn't be until the end of November. This sort of.
I'm pretty sure that's a crime, isn't it?
Well,
I mean,
it gets worse. Like this sort of loathsome guy who I will not name. In human resources there was like, well, there's nothing we can do about it. You were hired late. Somehow, like, I was hired late, and somehow I have to suffer for it.
Yeah.
But then there was just a series of errors. I was teaching 3 classes, but they had me teaching 1 class. So even when I was paid, I wasn't paid what I was supposed to be paid. They had me in as someone who had an MA when I had a PhD. So I mean, it literally took until December until I received what I was owed, and this was we're talking about starvation wages. Anyway, I was initially led to believe that this was just a unique situation on my part, and I found out through contact with the union that I think up to 400 adjuncts hadn't gotten their paychecks on time.
That sounds about right.
And this is my frustration with the CUNY union. I was like, well, isn't this is I mean, this is a situation in which people should just walk out, because if adjuncts walked out, I mean, you cripple CUNY. I mean, CUNY runs on adjuncts, right? Yeah. Oh no, we're talking to HR. So I ended up talking to the Chronicle of Higher Education, and sort of publicizing the situation, which I don't think the people in human resources appreciated. But
there was action from it, wasn't there?
Well, initially they sent out letters of apology to everyone who hadn't received their paycheck. Mm-hmm. What happened in my case was that I was collecting unemployment prior to starting at Queens College. Yeah. This was last summer. And
yes, America, your professors are on unemployment.
Yes.
The percentage of adjuncts on
unemployment, food stamps
is staggering. I wish more people understood that.
And it's a sort of proletarianized professoriate.
Even my parents hear like professor, and they think I must be rich. And it's just an insane, kind of, it's like everyone's missed the last 30 years, like that just doesn't happen anymore. But not that professors were ever rich, but
CUNY at Queens College has contested the unemployment benefits.
Yeah.
And
that's that.
And the Department of Labor initially.
So, just to make this clear, CUNY is suing you for unemployment for back payment back on some unemployment benefits. They want your welfare back.
Well, what happened was that the Department of Labor initially ruled in my favor. Right, we're talking about. It's not a lot of money. I think it works out to $1,200, right? And the Department of Labor ruled in my favor, but they appealed it, and it went to administrative hearing, and we had the hearing a few weeks ago, and the administrative law judge has just ruled in their favor. So I have to now pay the Department of Labor. I mean, CUNY is doing it because they want their rates. They don't want a precedent established.
Right.
I mean, they don't. I mean, what I've heard is that they contest most of their adjuncts' unemployment benefits claims. But the way that this is playing out for me is that, since they rule in their favor, the Department of Labor is now going to try to claw back the $1,200, and I'm appealing that. But it's just, I mean, first of all, financially, it's difficult for me, but it's just so infuriating because. I mean, not only do we get paid, we get paid nothing, and they didn't pay me and hundreds of other people for months, and they're contesting the measly benefits.
Yeah, and while administrators are making 6 figures, and an incredible amount of administrators making 6 figures. I mean, we have so many vice presidents at our schools; it's unbelievable. So there's all of this like how do you deal with cynicism? Because it's I kind of made a nod to the romantic notion of being an academic, but why did you get into academia in the first place? What was your, just to go back a little bit, what was your original notion in going to graduate school and living this life? Did you know it was going to be this way?
No, I think that a lot of, hopefully it's changed, because I think there is, the actual plight of, or the concrete situation of actually existing academia, I think has received more publicity. But, I went to it because I had these very romantic notions, the life of the mind.
Yeah,
I enjoy teaching, I enjoy writing, literature. For me, using literature as a vehicle to explore intellectual and political history.
Yeah.
But in light of
the world doesn't need that anymore,
the
Anthony.
difficulties that I've dealt with, I don't know. Would you do it again? I just feel like if the only problem
it's
is
something I think about a lot. Definitely. I at the same time, I kind of try to have this almost Buddhist, religious notion about it, where it's I can't. I try to think about it in terms of like time, and I can't like regret serves me no purpose.
Yeah.
So I can't go down the road of like should I or shouldn't I, because I did. Like the fact is, here I am with a PhD in a job market and kind of culture that doesn't value that. So what am I gonna do?
But here's the issue, though. I mean, and this is what else?
Do I go get? Do I go?
What
be a
else would you
plumber?
do? What else would you do?
Yeah.
Because I mean, the other thing is like, one of these sort of stock responses to, the adjunct's plight is like, well, do something else, right? Just
I'm
get
only
out of
trained
it.
to do this.
What
And
are you gonna do? Like like this year, I sort of alt ac sort of thing, and I was looking at other fields. But I mean,
you know what
it's-
that is? Become an administrator. That's literally what alt-ac is. Like that, the main message, I think. I mean, I've gone to a few of these like alt-ac things with the discipline of history, and maybe it's just the discipline of history itself is unimaginative when it comes to alt-ac. But it's like literally like, well, you could go work at a museum, which is not real. Like that, it's not. Museums aren't necessarily hiring historians. It's not what they're looking for. They're looking for like fundraisers.
Well, like the same thing.
mainly.
Like, well, you're English. Like, well, publishing, but publishing isn't bad straights. I mean,
Yeah, right.
And even if I got, I talked to a few people in publishing. Even it's like, even if you got a position, I mean, you'd be getting an entry level position. It would be me with a bunch of 22-year-olds. It's like And that's a long shot, because you're effectively off of the job market for however long, 10 years, 12 years. I mean, these aren't easily transferable skills, and the general job market is miserable.
Yes, yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, it's in the context of a larger kind of economic crisis, that's going on. That I mean, I don't know where it's headed. And part of me, and this is like the kind of cynical, macabre part of me, is like, hopes for some sort of like revolutionary situation, because otherwise I don't really see out of my own, not only my own personal situation, but like the larger, like if we're struggling, then like, I mean, you think about people that aren't, that don't have a level of education or don't have like these kinds of options. It's insane to me. Like,
no,
really,
I know you're
it's
right.
Scary.
I mean, we're seeing, immiseration across the board.
Yeah.
I mean, to a certain extent, we're from a relatively sort of privileged milieu. At some point, the PhD was the ticket to a solid sort of middle class existence.
Yes,
and had a certain kind of prestige and status attached to it, and that's no longer the case. I mean, sort of the proletarianization of the professoriate, and yet we're sort of joining the ranks of vast swath of great majority.
Right. And it's funny because it's like it's not that our original ideas about going into academia were about to go make a lot of money and live a privileged life of luxury, but at the same time, I did feel like I was at least going to be able to pay back my student loans in some way.
Or
and
healthcare.
Yeah, right. Or just like, being able to pay the rent, and live. And that's it seems almost, I think that's why there's disbelief from like people like your parents or whoever that are like kind of outside of this system, to tell them like, well, I'm having trouble finding a job.
It seems as if that sort of older sort of kind of post-war the notion of like, lifelong position with a living wage, benefits, etc., is the new utopia, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
for anyone.
It's like the kind of thing that in the people were rejecting in the 1960s.
Yeah.
It
makes you see the 60s in a very different way when you look at like like Kerouac and Ginsberg like rejecting the kind of like materialistic
the constraints
the
of this sort of bourgeois existence.
And I'm kind of like,
now
oh man, that kind of looks nice. Like that house in the suburbs with like Tommy and Timmy, like playing in front of the two picket fences is like, I mean, it sounds like ideal in some weird way. It's like that was the utopia. That was the utopic moment, and we're living in a generation that's going to experience something far less.
I wonder about that. This is, I don't know. Do you know who Gopal Balakrishnan is?
No.
It's like it's sort of a friend of mine, but he's also somebody he writes for an editor at New Left Review, and he wrote an interesting essay about sort of the prospects for capitalism, called talk about the stationary state.
Yeah, right.
That what we're going to see is this sort of this increasingly dysfunctional but sort of stagnant situation.
Yeah, right.
But also kind of an entire generation in this sort of advanced core in places like the United States that won't have any sense of what a secure employment is.
Right.
The precariously employed, etc. He's sort of wondering what kind of subjectivity that will this produce. It's sort of like he refers to Gramsci's notion of a sort of a passive revolution. I mean, will it radicalize these people? I mean, we're sort of talking about this before. I mean, it seems like something has to happen. Something has to give.
Right.
I think there's a certain sort of naivete amongst at least certain representatives of the left.
Yeah.
And thinking that that something might be some sort of revolutionary transformation.
Right,
It could
right.
just as well be some sort of variant on right-wing authoritarianism,
Yeah.
etc. But I wonder how.
Well, we're living in a kind of like bizarre milieu of like the politics of the 60s and 70s kind of like coming back, but at the same time, like it's a new era. Like when you see like, I don't know if you saw like the Huey P. Newton Gun Club in Texas.
Yeah,
the other
I just
day.
saw that
Like,
today.
It's like these, basically like a bunch of like black men and women, dressed in black, taking the streets and doing like an open carry demonstration. Like they have like, assault rifles.
So has the
essentially.
NRA come out to support the UEP?
I didn't see if the
Gun
NRA
Club
had any
and their
comment
Second
on that.
Amendment.
But it's like, but one of the questions I wanted to, like, I was thinking about asking you is like, jokingly, but maybe not jokingly, is like, how are you preparing for the coming race war? It's like, it seems like Ferguson is like we're recording this kind of in the middle of, or maybe the tail end, who knows, of like what's going on in St. Louis and Ferguson, Missouri. But is that the first race riot since like the early 90s, right? In the United States?
Yeah, I don't know. Since
the
you're
LA
thinking about the
riots?
Rodney King. Yeah.
Yeah, I think. I know there were riots in Crown Heights in 1991, and tension between Orthodox Jews and black people.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, one way of sort of thinking about it is that this is. I mean, there's a lot of disillusionment, I think, in the wake of Occupy, right? That people got very excited about Occupy, and that was all the Arab Spring, etc. There's a sort of a global 1848 or 1968 moment,
right.
And then people were disappointed. Although, I mean, if we think about both,
it was like 1968.5.
Yeah.
I mean,
although in both of those cases there was, I mean, in both of those cases you had sort of disappointing, sort of counter-revolutionary Thermidorian moments after that. But maybe, I mean, perhaps no. I mean, perhaps Occupy was one manifestation of
the egg beginning to crack.
Yeah, sort of global. Not unrest. And
did you go down there? Like, how did you feel around Occupy? Like, did you feel like you were an Occupy activist or just some like an observer, or like how did you attach yourself at all to that?
Occupy was strange for me because I would go down there. At the time, I was still working at West Point.
Yeah.
So oftentimes I would go. I would go to West Point. I mean, it was I was living in New York City and commuting upstate 5 days a week. It's a 5-day-a-week schedule. So I would go up
You're
there.
Taking the Metro North?
I had a car, so
Okay.
I would drive, and sometimes I would take Metro North. But even with Metro North, you have to drive from the station,
Right.
in Garrison. But I would drive down, and then sometimes I would go out to Zuccotti Park. So there's this sort of strange cognitive dissonance. But I was down there, several times. And it was exciting.
Yeah.
At the same time, I was frustrated because there was just this this ideological incoherence.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
oftentimes I would find myself talking to, these sort of Ron Paul, anarcho-libertarians.
Sure.
And then, that's actually when I first started to get to know the Jacobin
Yeah, right.
people. That's when I met Connor and Boskar. In fact, one of my most vivid memories.
Did you meet them in Zuccotti Park?
Well, I met them at that. I don't know if you were there. They had a kind of a read. No, it wasn't a read. It was this debate at Blue Stockings.
Okay, yeah.
And it was Doug.
Yeah.
It was Doug Henwood and Jody Dean were there representing
yeah.
a kind of like I don't know, statist socialism, and I think it was.
You can look
Malcolm
this up
Harris
on,
and Natasha
on
Leonard, yeah.
YouTube if you're curious about this debate. I think it's
Were you
on
there
YouTube.
for that?
No, I wasn't there. I think I've seen. I sat through some of it though on YouTube and watched that debate take place.
That's when I heard there was a sort of memorable line uttered by one of the panelists about it should be about Occupy was about finding new ways of fucking, new encoding new forms of subjectivity, which. It's not. I just don't think. I mean, it's easily commodifiable. To say, and I think to a certain extent. I mean, I was very disappointed in the aftermath of Occupy because it seems like certain people, at least, use it as a vehicle for career advancement.
Yes,
right?
yes, and you have to also put, and I think this is true of the '60s and the civil rights movement and everything else. You have to factor in the fact that the police used violence to wipe it out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, they literally. I don't know if you saw the picture of what's is it Ray? the police commissioner of the NYPD,
Kelly.
Yeah, Ray Kelly. The picture of him in like the New York Post on the cover of the New York Times is like him walking through Zuccotti Park after his like thugs had like cleaned it out in the middle of the night, and he has like his chin up, and he looks like this kind of like Roman dictator. It's a really like kind of amazing photo. He has like a black trench coat on. It's like a perfect image of American fascism.
Well, I mean, you know, the powers that be were clearly threatened by this. Even though, I mean, effectively there wasn't really much there in terms of a significant threat, but they were just threatened by the very
still pepper sprayed like young women.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And beat the shit out of them. Like it really angered them.
That's
obviously.
telling, right?
Yeah.
Even the possibility of
Yeah.
a systemic challenge of an anti-capitalist movement. Like, I mean, they had to nip that in the bud, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this was clearly, I mean, it was seemingly a kind of a centrally organized effort we found. I mean, there was coordination amongst police departments.
But there was no one in Occupy that was really calling for violence. That's the thing, and that was kind of part of my disappointment in a sense. It's like I was saying to some of my friends at the time, and they always thought I was kind of gross about it. But I was kind of like, I'll take Occupy seriously when they start erecting guillotines in Zuccotti Park, you know, and you know, Jacobin uses, I know, like the iconography of the guillotine in a kind of like, you know, snarky way. But like part of me like was like, well, and I don't like, it's not that I'm advocating violence. It's at the same time I was kind of like, well, you know, these quivers of like protest are going to happen. Like people are going, we're like America, you know, it takes a while. The elite can fuck over Americans a lot more than like the elites in Europe can. You know what I mean? Like without people like rising up. Like Americans will take a lot more before they rise up. So we're gonna get these like little like bursts of
but
like
how do you
people
I mean
screaming.
The thing is, it's like a horizontalist challenge to the power of the American security state. I mean, it's sort of laughable. I mean, I remember getting into these conversations with these military guys up at West Point when Occupy was going on, and they thought it was a kind of a joke, right? I mean, you know,
you can't fight the state.
I mean, the fact is this:
the state's got all the toys, man.
I mean, but Occupy was
they've got sound weapons.
Occupy
you know what I
was
mean?
was sort of the subject of ridicule,
Yeah.
amongst a lot of the cadets that I taught, etc. And this is when I was teaching the Cuba class,
Right?
And
right.
like I said, I'm not in no way am I. You know, I don't have this sort of romantic view of the Cuban Revolution, and yet they still despise Che Guevara, but they still offer Che Guevara grudging respect, right? I mean, you know, we read Man, and you know,
where's the respect come from?
Well, the
respect
respect
as a military leader and as like
yeah,
a
the
guy
fact
that actually made a revolution.
Yeah,
happen.
and we read his.
It's kind of like the grudging respect they give like Ho Chi Minh.
Exactly.
You know, like he was a genius. Like he was, and you have to like give it to him that he's a better military strategist.
And if you read, you know, a lot of Che
but no
Guevara's,
respect for the politics. Sorry, I just wanted to complete.
No. But if you read Che Guevara's vision of socialism, which I don't think is a vision of socialism we necessarily should embrace. I mean, it's a vision of socialism as the sort of the platoon, like society as the platoon. This is sort of like, you know, very martial. Almost classically Republican notion of sort of fraternal sacrifice. So, you know, when we were reading this stuff, I mean, they recognized the rhetoric, and it's rhetoric that I mean, these are things that they've internalized, that they believe in, yet it's in the service of this demonic ideology. So it created some sort of interesting moments in class. But, you know, it's a question, right? I mean, the powers that be and the sort of security apparatus, I mean, they're only going to, I mean, you know.
Well, that's what we're seeing in Ferguson, right? Is like, here's another kind of explosion of violence, you know, and you know, the state's coming down really hard. I mean, the state is, you know, I talked about this with another guest on the show a few weeks ago. There's like the Israelification of like U.S. security, but particularly like on the domestic scene is like, you know, they're basically, you know, responding in this like amazingly disproportionate, violent way to like people that are like throwing water bottle at them, and it's like I think of the water bottle as like a rocket from Hamas, right? This like little bottle rocket that like lands on a street somewhere, and like the response is just this kind of like overwhelming violence, and it just seems like that is a kind of like impossible situation.
Well, I mean, is this the end point of the so-called war on terror, right? I mean, there's a sense in which, I mean, this entire sort of security apparatus was constructed. I mean, you know, civil rights were gutted. I mean, the Department of Homeland Security, a surveillance state, and it's ultimately being turned on
Well, it's also, what you're mentioning, those like anarcho-libertarians. That's the kind of like paranoid, delusional kind of stuff that they fall into. And part of me is like, well, it's paranoid. It might not be delusional. There is the kind of like, I don't know, the like Dick Cheney's building camps across the country. Like that. I think I fell into that pretty hardcore during the Bush administration, because it was very easy to see them as like, I didn't even think they were going to give up power in 2008. Like I saw them as like just a pure, ruthless imperial psychopaths that like now I see them as just kind of like a uglier or less less sophisticated end or front of like the same apparatus.
Yeah, I mean, there's continuity. I mean, the Obama is sort of, again, it's a sort of, in some ways, it's exactly that kind of that military liberalism or humanism, right?
Definitely.
I mean, there's a kind of a humanist veneer. That's married to, it's the same strong-armed tactics.
Well, to them, like drone warfare is their contribution to humanity. It's like, well, that's like dropping a drone on a neighborhood is so much better than boots on the ground.
It's a sort of technocratic coercion, right? Technocratic authoritarianism. Under the Bush administration, these were actually violations of law. Like the Obama, the lawyer, has actually sort of written them into law, written them into code, and that's fine. All of the liberals who were so aghast, were talking about making these sort of comparisons to Weimar, are absolutely fine with what's been going on for the past 6 years. It's just, liberalism has been completely discredited, I think.
Well, I mean, there's a few ways of looking at like what's happened this summer with like both Gaza and Ferguson. Like the cynic in me is like, oh, this is like just an acceleration of that state apparatus and like violence and etc. But at the same time, we are having a conversation about police militarization. It's like that's on the national docket, as well as it seems like. As much as there are still very loud Zionist voices, particularly in our own government, there is like a larger conversation about Israel that seems like it's turning. I know the Israel conversation has been going on for a long time.
Yeah.
That's like most people's entry into the left on college campuses is like finding out about Israel and Palestine. But at the same time, does it feel like a moment?
I think there's a shift. I think that you're actually hearing anti-Zionist perspectives and voices that in fairly mainstream media organs that you wouldn't have at all, like a few years ago. And I feel like, I think one of the things that was sort of discredited during the recent offensive was, liberal Zionism again. That's sort of incoherent. Now, it's just, I don't know about you. I actually had several very sort of ugly exchanges and, a couple of, long-term friendships ended. Because, I think at this point, we can't tolerate this anymore.
Right.
This is just like staying silent on Israel for fear of being branded as anti-Semitic.
We've got these absolutely repulsive.
We've got these lefty friends or left liberal friends, but somehow there's the Israel blind spot. We have in the past. I would find myself in these sort of positions where you would just shut up. You would tolerate it. I couldn't this time around.
And when is this like in real life or on social media?
Well, in largely social media, although in one instance, the exchange happened on social media, but it was a long friendship. And I was surprised, but what I found though is that there's a kind of desperation on the part of these sort of liberal American apologists. It's just difficult for them to. They put it on Netanyahu, right?
Right.
It's just if they get somebody else in there, in the same way that these people like once we get Bush out of office,
right. Like everything will be solved. It's like that. Jon Stewart kind of version of liberalism that kind of grosses me out.
But it's difficult. I think it's difficult to maintain that position in the case of Israel when you have 95% of the population now, is in support of. The society itself seems like it's rabid, it's frenzied. There's no left there.
And it's a weird mirror of American society too. Like the level of racism and like kind of like jingoism is disproportionately high within that society.
Well, they're both settler colonial projects, right? With this sort of messianic ideology. In certain ways, Zionism, I study sort of early American stuff. Zionism is a kind of a 19th, 20th century version of the sort of Puritan errand in the wilderness, right?
They're both cities upon a hill. They're both like Israel and the United States occupy these kind of like individual or unique positions in the world because of their mythologies.
Yeah,
like
I mean that's why I think that's why I find some of these.
They're both created by God, is what I'm saying.
The Mearsheimer of Walt, like it's all about the this Israel lobby. I mean, certainly the Israel lobby is powerful, but I don't think that you can reduce the sort of relationship between the United States and Israel simply to the machinations of some all-powerful lobby. I mean there are deep connections between these societies ideologically and materially. I mean, Israel serves American interests to a certain extent, and Israel's relationship with the United States also is beneficial to Israel. And there's this sort of deeper.
It's an offshore military base for the United States.
There's this deeper elective affinity.
Yeah,
that's why evangelicals love it.
Well, I mean, it's like I don't know if you've seen like it's like the Pervert's Guide to Ideology. It's Zizek's thing. It's like on Netflix, and like he has a bit where he talks about basically like there's this idea of like, well, if there's no God, then anything is possible, because no, like atheism or the belief in no God would mean that any kind of barbarism and human degradation is possible. But it's like, actually it's the reverse, that like if you believe that God is on your side and you believe in then that's where like anything is possible.
Well, it's it's antinomianism. Do you have any?
Please tell me a little bit about it. Give me the Wikipedia antinomianism.
Well, it's just this sort of it's a sort of a dissident current that's usually within Calvinism, right?
Yeah,
there's Calvinism with this like sort of notion of predestination, right? I mean, you're saved or you're damned by the grace of God from the beginning of time, and there's absolutely nothing you could do about it, right? And on the one hand, that that was a kind of belief that produced tremendous anxiety, but on the other hand, another way of interpreting it is like, well, you have an assurance that you're one of the elect, so essentially you're above the law.
Yeah,
I mean, it's you can do whatever you want as one of God's elect, and this was a current within sort of New England Puritanism, and there's a way of thinking about exactly sort of antinomianism as God's elect. Anything is possible, everything is permitted. You're saved.
Right. Oh, that's a scary idea. Thanks so much for talking to me.
Thanks.